Some ultimatums aren't really ultimatums. They're confessions. When a person looks you in the eye, the person who once promised to choose you every single day and says, if you don't like it, leave, they aren't testing your strength. They're revealing how little they've valued it. This story isn't about a dramatic explosion. It's about the slow erosion that happens before one. Pay attention to the small things, the turned screens, the changed passwords, the way a person starts calling your love a leash. By the time the real betrayal arrives, it's never the first one. It's just the first one you can't ignore. My name is Daniel Mercer, and the night my wife told me to leave if I didn't like her life, she was standing at our bathroom mirror in a dress I had never seen, with her phone already buzzing in her hand before she'd even zipped up her boots. Before we continue, kindly subscribe, like, and drop your comment below. Your support means the world to me. It was February in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of February that doesn't announce itself with snow. It just sits on your chest like a stone. She smelled like the perfume I'd given her for our 5th anniversary. She hadn't worn it for me in months. Connor's already on his way, she said, not turning around. She said it the way you'd say the pizza is here. Casual. Bored even. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and watched my wife, Leanne, adjust her earrings with the practiced calm of someone who had already decided the outcome of this conversation before it began. It's 11 o'clock, I said. She clicked the second earring into place. I'm aware of the time, Daniel. We have a 7 o'clock call with the mortgage broker tomorrow morning. She picked up her clutch and finally looked at me. Not with softness, not with guilt, but with something worse. Patience. The kind you offer a child who doesn't understand why the adults need to talk. If you don't like how I live my life, she said, then leave. She didn't raise her voice. That was the part that stayed with me for months afterward. She said it the way you'd read a sentence off a billboard. Flat, already decided, and then she walked past me, and the front door closed, and I was alone in a house full of lights I'd forgotten to turn off. I should back up, because that moment didn't come from nowhere, even if it felt that way. Leanne and I had been married 6 years, and together for almost 9. We met in Cincinnati at a mutual friend's rooftop birthday party. A warm June night where the skyline looked better than it had any right to. She was finishing her MBA. I was 2 years into running the project management office at a mid-sized logistics firm. She laughed loudly at a joke I made that I immediately forgot, and I remember thinking, that's someone who doesn't perform laughter. I was 28. She was 26. We were too young to know that attraction can outrun character for a surprisingly long time. We were good together, for a while. We moved to Columbus for my promotion. We bought a gray Craftsman on Bryden Road with a crooked front step I kept meaning to fix, and a kitchen that smelled like old wood in a way I grew to love. We had routines. Sunday breakfasts, walks along the Scioto Trail, Friday evenings with her work friends, or my college buddy Marcus and his wife. We argued sometimes, but the arguments resolved. We had a language for each other. Then Connor Hale entered the picture. He arrived the way a lot of problems do, disguised as something harmless. Just a colleague, a contact. He knows everyone in the industry. He's been really helpful with my networking. Leanne worked as a regional sales director for a medical device company, and the industry ran on conference dinners, client events, and connections. Connor was a consultant. He made introductions. He had the kind of effortless social ease that looks like generosity, until you understand what it's purchasing. I met him once, at a work happy hour she brought me to. He shook my hand and said, Daniel, I've heard a lot about you. He smiled with all his teeth. There was something in his eyes that said, I know things about your wife that you don't. I drove home that night feeling something I couldn't name yet. I told myself it was just a long week. The first sign something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It never is. It was laughter. Leanne used to laugh with me, full, loud, unguarded. Then she started laughing at her phone in the next room and going quiet when I walked in. She started tilting the screen away. Small thing. Easy to explain. But a marriage has a climate, and when that climate shifts, you feel it the way you feel a window left open at night. Not cold enough to wake you, just enough to make everything feel slightly wrong. I am, by nature, a methodical man. My father was a civil engineer who measured twice and cut once, and said things like, evidence before conclusion. I built systems for a living, logistics, supply chains, contingency plans. I was not prone to jealousy. I was prone to observation. What I observed over the first quarter of that year. Leanne began attending teen dinners that lasted until midnight. She switched her phone passcode for the first time in 4 years without mentioning it. She started criticizing habits I'd had for a decade. My early bedtime became boring. My meal prepping became rigid. My asking when she'd be home became surveillance. The criticism came wrapped in progressive language, which made it slippery. You treat me like a possession, Daniel. Marriage isn't about accounting for every hour. I tried to adjust. I stayed up later. I asked fewer questions. I told myself I was evolving. What I was actually doing was quietly shrinking to make room for something I hadn't consented to. One Thursday in March, I cooked dinner. Pot roast, mashed potatoes from scratch, a green bean dish she'd mentioned wanting to try. I lit candles. It wasn't an occasion. I just wanted one evening that felt like us again. She texted at 6:47, running behind. Don't wait. She came home at 1 a.m. I was on the couch, not quite asleep. She stopped when she saw the table. Still set. Candles burned to stubs, food covered in cold. You left it out, she said. Not moved. Annoyed. I thought you might be hungry. She set her bag down and looked at me with an expression I recognized from negotiations at work. The look of someone managing a situation rather than inhabiting it. I ate, she said, and went to bed. I sat in the dark for a long time after that. I told myself she was stressed. That I was being sensitive. That good men didn't make their wives feel guilty for having full lives. What I was really doing was choosing not to know, because knowing would require a response, and I wasn't ready to make that choice yet. By April, Connor had graduated from colleague to friend to the only person who really understands what I'm trying to build right now. That last phrase arrived on a Sunday morning while I was making coffee. She said it without looking up from her phone. Like it was a given. Like I had already been moved into a different category in her internal organizational chart. I put the coffee down and sat across from her at the kitchen table. I want to talk about Connor, I said. She finally looked up. No panic. No guilt. Just that administrative patience again. What about him? I think it's crossed a line. She tilted her head. What line? The amount of your time and attention he receives. The late nights. The private jokes. The way you treat my concern like it's a character flaw. She leaned back and crossed her arms. Connor is my colleague and my friend. I'm not going to limit my professional relationships because of your insecurities. Insecurities. That word landed like a trap door. I'm not insecure, I said, keeping my voice even. I'm telling you that something in this marriage is off, and I need you to take that seriously. She looked at me for a moment, then said, maybe the problem is that you've always needed everything to feel balanced and controlled. Not every relationship is a supply chain, Daniel. She stood up and took her coffee to the bedroom. I sat at that table for 20 minutes, staring at the grain of the wood. Contempt is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives in polished sentences. It arrives dressed as insight. I found out the truth the way I suspect most people do. Not through confrontation, but through a moment of ordinary access. She'd left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower. I wasn't looking for anything, but a message was visible on the screen, and I read it before I could stop myself. It was from Connor. The message didn't require interpretation. I walked to the living room and sat down. I put my hands on my knees, and I breathed. The strange thing about confirmation is that it rarely feels the way you imagined. I had pictured rage. What arrived instead was clarity. Cold, quiet, total. I closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it. I did not wake her. I did not send screenshots. I did not call her name. I went to work the next morning, did my job, and spent the evening making a plan. Because evidence without a plan is just chaos with documentation. The night she told me to leave, that February night I described at the beginning, I had already been carrying the truth for 3 weeks. I had already spoken to a lawyer. I had already moved a portion of my savings into a personal account. I had already told Marcus quietly that I might need somewhere to stay. So when she walked out that door, I didn't stand in the hallway and fall apart. I sat on the edge of our bed. I looked at the room, the furniture we'd chosen together, the books on her nightstand, the framed photo of us at Hocking Hills State Park, where she'd laughed at a garter snake and grabbed my arm like I was the only solid thing in the world. Then I packed 2 bags, 1 box, clothes, documents, my grandfather's watch, the cast iron pan my mother had given us at our wedding, because I wasn't leaving anything behind that could be used as evidence of my devastation. I wrote a note and left it on the kitchen counter. It said, "You were clear. I heard you. I'll be in touch about next steps." I turned off every light in the house and walked out into the February cold. Marcus opened the door in sweatpants and old Ohio State gear, looked at my bags, and said, "Couch or guest room?" "Guest room." "It's ready." The divorce finalized in October, a Thursday afternoon in a courthouse on South Front Street. Fluorescent lights, institutional carpet, a judge who moved through broken marriages with the brisk efficiency of someone filing expense reports. Leanne wore gray. I wore navy. We did not speak directly. Our lawyers managed the final logistics with a professionalism that made the whole thing feel almost abstract. I signed my name and walked out into an afternoon that smelled like rain and exhaust, and leaves starting to turn. I sat in my car for a while. Then I drove home. I ran into her once, after. At a holiday party in Short North that a mutual colleague had hosted. The kind of event where you know perhaps a third of the room and spend the rest of the time finding the food. She saw me first. She looked different. Not ruined. Leanne was too composed for ruin. But there was something behind her eyes that hadn't been there before. The quiet that follows a fantasy that didn't survive contact with reality. I'd heard through mutual connections that Connor had never been what she believed. That there had been other women orbiting the same easy charm. That she had discovered this in a way that was humiliating and public. She walked toward me with her hands together, like a woman approaching a conversation she'd rehearsed in the car. "Daniel," she said, "can we talk?" The room around us kept moving. Someone laughed loudly near the bar. A server passed with a tray of bruschetta. I set my drink down and stood. "This isn't the place," I said. She laughed once. The short, bitter kind. "You always do that." The perfectly controlled response. Like you're above feeling anything. The old invitation arrived right on schedule. The bait. Defend yourself inside her frame. I let it pass. I felt everything, I told her. I just stopped letting you decide what to do with it. She stepped slightly closer. Her voice dropped. "I made mistakes. I know that. But what we built, that was real, Daniel. You don't just walk away from real." What struck me in that moment was the framing. Not what I did to us, but what we had. The marriage is something that had happened to her, rather than something she had systematically dismantled over 18 months. I looked at her carefully, without anger, without longing, without the particular ache that used to live in my chest when I imagined this exact scenario. "Leanne," I said, "I loved you. I want you to know that. What you did hurt me in ways I'm still understanding. But love was never the problem between us. Respect was." Her face shifted, first soft, then sharp. "So that's it? You've moved on and I just get a summary?" "You got years," I said quietly. "You had all the years." She stood there a moment longer, waiting, I think, for a different ending to offer itself. None did. Someone called her name from across the room. She gave me a look that I couldn't quite categorize. Not quite regret, not quite anger. Something in between, something that belonged entirely to her now. Then she walked away. I live in Columbus still, but on the other side of town now. Third-floor condo with wide windows and enough counter space in the kitchen to actually cook in. I still label cables. I still fold grocery bags. I still wake up before the city on Saturday mornings and make coffee in the quiet. Last spring, I went on a date with a woman named Rachel Torres, a landscape architect with a dry sense of humor and a habit of sketching on whatever paper is nearest when an idea hits her. We've been taking it slowly. She asked me early on if I was fully out of my last relationship. I told her the truth. Legally, yes. Emotionally, mostly. Still working on the corners. She said that's the most honest thing anyone's ever told me on a second date. I told her I was working on saying hard things without dressing them up. She said, "Keep working." When I think about Leanne now, and I do, sometimes, less than before, I don't think about the party, or the late nights, or the lawyer calls, or any of the dramatic coordinates of the story. I think about a Tuesday in March. A set table, candles burned to stubs, a pot roast going cold. That was the real moment, not the confrontation, not the packing. That quiet Tuesday, when someone looked at care laid out in front of them and felt inconvenienced by it. Betrayal doesn't always arrive in the form of a confession. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a person looking at your effort and deciding it cost too much to acknowledge. I did not leave because I stopped loving her. I left because she made contempt feel like logic and called it growth. And the strange thing, the thing I couldn't have understood until I was standing on the other side of it, is that when she said leave, she thought she was dismissing me. She was actually setting me free. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know it was never really about one night at a club. It was about the pattern surrounding it. The cold dinners, the turned screens, the way one person can slowly redefine your dignity until standing up for yourself feels like the problem. Daniel didn't win because Leanne struggled afterward. He won the moment he stopped explaining his worth to someone committed to undervaluing it. That quiet kind of resolution. No speeches, no scenes, just a note on a counter and the door closing behind you. That's the kind that lasts. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. And subscribe to Reddit Family Secrets for more stories where the truth comes out slow and the comeback is quieter than anyone expected.